Chandra? Well, I know it's working. Ooh, it's hot. Mic check, 1, 2. Yeah, let's push the button in. Mic check, 1, 2, 1, 2. Mic check. Can you hear that? You good? Mic check, 1, 2.
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, test.
as they know to make. Good morning and welcome. This oversight hearing of the Committee of Disabilities and Assistance and Memorial Affairs will now come to order. Before we begin, I want to welcome the full committee chairman, Phil Rowe, to the hearing with us today. Today we're going to be discussing how our nation's honors veterans who have passed on. It's appropriate that we are holding this hearing so close to Memorial Day and yesterday's anniversary of D-Day and the 100th anniversary of the deadliest day of battle of Belleau Woods, when General John J. Pershing ordered a counteroffensive to drive the Germans out of Belleau Wood during World War I. I recently had the privilege to travel with Chairman Rowe to visit some of the most hallowed ground in the world, including that very battlefield and others. On June 6, 1918, the U.S. Marines, under the command of General James Harburn, led the attack against 4 German divisions in Belleau Wood. I couldn't help but think about that battle as we walked through the cemetery and the woods itself. Belleau Wood is very important to me, not just because I'm a Marine, but one of the Marines who fought at Belleau Wood, Private Paul Stout, was born in Jackson County, Illinois, right near my hometown. He survived the Battle of Belleau Wood, but he fell July 19, 1918, less than a month later while the Marines were advancing through the French countryside. My American Legion post, my home American Legion post, 127 in Murfreesboro, Illinois, now bears the name of Paul Stout. I thought about Paul Stout, Private Stout, and the rest of those determined and bullheaded devil dogs who spent June 6, 1918, repeatedly charging entrenched German forces with no thought of regret. And too many men are still there. But by the end of that day, Marines had suffered more than 1,000 casualties. It was the bloodiest day of the battle, which went on for almost 4 weeks. Eventually, the Marines drove the Germans out, but at a horrible cost. By the end of the Battle of Belleau Wood, almost 10,000 Americans were dead, wounded, or missing in action. And walking among the graves of those brave men who fought and died so far from home was one of the most moving experiences of my life. It was overwhelming to think that each headstone was a monument to a husband, a father, a son, or a brother who didn't make it home. It was unforgettable. It was also incredibly inspiring. That visit reminded me of how much I owe to these fallen heroes, and I'm very grateful that I was able to honor them. Every American should have that experience. We all need to be reminded that the freedom we enjoy is because of the brave men and women who serve in our armed forces. We also need to ensure that future generations understand that our freedom will always depend on the service and sacrifice of our nation's veterans. The NCA and the ABMC are responsible for maintaining national cemeteries, not just to demonstrate our gratitude, but to help inspire our children and our grandchildren to follow the example of patriotism and service embodied by those resting in these cemeteries. That is the only way the United States will continue to be a free country. This is why this hearing is so important. As chairman of this subcommittee, I don't hear many complaints about the NCA and ABMC taking care of our national cemeteries. But there's always more we can do, and certainly I know the NCA and the ABMC have ideas for improvements, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses about the ways that we can better honor these extraordinary Americans. So thank you again for being here today. I will now yield to Ranking Member Esty for any opening remarks she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, note that it is very appropriate that we are having
this hearing today, a day after the 74th anniversary of D-Day. And I must note my husband's birthday. It's very easy to remember. I've been reflecting on our duty as members of this committee to ensure the respectful and dignified memorialization in perpetuity of America's military veterans. And I want to welcome Undersecretary Reeves to his new position, leading the National Cemetery Administration, and I'm looking forward to his ideas on how to further improve how the agency deals with veterans' families. And I want to let you know that, like Chairman Bost, I hear very good reports, and so we want to continue to ensure that we are serving veterans and their families in the way we would all want to. Because this is the first hearing since 2014 on NCA, I want to take a minute to publicly recognize the heroism of the National Cemeteries workforce in Florida and Puerto Rico following the hurricanes last year. This committee was receiving daily updates on VA asset damage and operational status, and on the very first day, the reports were that cemetery employees were reporting in for duty within hours of the storm passing in each case. Burials continued as scheduled within 36 hours, despite power outages and damage. It was heroic. It was heroic of these people, many of whose homes were destroyed or damaged or flooded, whose families were themselves in distress. And I don't think they've ever properly gotten the credit and the thanks from Congress and from the American people that they deserve for continuing to do their duty and to ensure that we properly memorialize and care for those who have served this country. So I want you to know how much we appreciate that, and we recognize there is no amount of compensation that can provide and compensate for that sort of devotion to duty. And I wanted to make sure we recognize that in our hearing today. I also want to recognize and welcome Secretary Matz. Congratulations on the work the Commission is doing all over the world to ensure that the cemeteries and memorials honoring fallen American service members continue to be as beautiful and hallowed places of remembrance as we would want them to be, but more and more as places to educate visitors who have no direct memory or knowledge of the battles that were fought nearby. This committee recently visited the American Cemetery in Normandy. I understand that there's a new visitor center, and that if the site is to be preserved, the Commission has plans to design and install new pedestrian walks. And having visited that cemetery with my children about 15 years ago, I can tell you for them, as young Americans, it was so remarkable, that visit of just seeing row after row after row and contemplating the young men who fell, who are now younger than my children are now, was striking and overwhelming. It's very different than what you read in textbooks. It is vivid and remarkable. So those preserving those sites, and again, the education aspect is part of what our nation needs to memorialize and to remember and to understand the consequences of war and what our responsibilities are in the world. I look forward to hearing from you, Secretary Matz, about these plans and what is planned for next year's 75th commemoration of D-Day. I want to also welcome our good friends from the VFW and the American Legion, our witnesses here today. You always join us and provide incredibly important perspective and feedback about what's happening on the ground. It's not just the laws we pass and regulations and the funding. It needs to work for people. And you help ensure that we understand whether our good intentions are being realized for the families and the veterans we're honored to serve. Your work with the subcommittee is greatly appreciated and greatly needed. Mr. Matz, I want to again let you know how much we appreciate your work on toxic exposure. We're very proud to, pardon? Mr. Wiseman, where is Mr. Wiseman? I'm sorry. Okay, I skipped a line here. We know you're moving on to be the Virginia State VFW commander, but please know our gratitude to you because of your work, in part, on your fierce advocacy on toxic exposure. We are so pleased to have been able to move forward on blue water veterans, an issue near and dear to your heart and that of many veterans. I can tell you in my district, in Chairman Boss district, and around this country, that has been a long, hard-fought battle, and you have helped get us nearer to the finish line. I want to thank you for your work on that, for Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange in Thailand, whose children were born with spina bifida. We'll also appreciate so much your hard work. So we
Thank you.
thank you and wish you well on your next endeavor. Again, I want to thank the chairman and the chairman for holding today's hearing. We look forward to your testimony. Again, thank you all very much for the work you do serving our nation's veterans.
Thank you, Ms. Essie. Chairman Rowe, do you have anything to do, any opening remarks?
Just thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm feeling a little bit outnumbered here with all these Marines. So this one, and Mr. Kaufman could be in the Army or a Marine. So what we'll do is we'll have them 2 Army and 2 Marines, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you all both and Ranking Member Esty for holding this hearing today. And one of my priorities is ensuring that our nation's veterans receive a proper resting place. Last month, as the chairman mentioned, I and others on the committee were honored to visit several overseas cemeteries and monuments to the brave men and women who served in World Wars I and II. And some of you already may know this, but before World War I, most of our fallen heroes were buried on the battlefield. And after the Great War, our country realized that some families may want to bring their loved ones home who perished in battle back to the United States, while others may want them buried overseas where they fell in service to our country. And as the chairman mentioned, in the Battle of Belleau Woods, we walked. I literally cannot imagine going across that wheat field, which is still a wheat field today, in machine gun fire that those men did. It's literally amazing. And also to be at that cemetery to see where walls, literally walls of marbled names that they never found that were missing in that, really remarkable. And also that this particular battle became of very interest to me as I learned more about it, is that it's the only, the 2nd Infantry Division, which I was in, was stood up in 1917. It's 100 years old last year. That was our 100th anniversary of the 2nd ID. And it's the only American Army division that's ever been commanded by a Marine. Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, obviously named after General Lejeune, who also commanded the 2nd Infantry Army Division. And these Marines were assigned to the 2nd Infantry Division. So it was a lot of history for me that I had really passed over in school and really got deep into, and it's an amazing part of our history. And most people in this country don't realize the ferocity of those battles. And I mean, this was hand-to-hand combat. When you're looking at 4 divisions, and we're looking at a very small piece of real estate. It wasn't very big at all, so really rather amazing. And since overseas cemeteries are thousands of miles from American soil, and the United States established the American Battle Monuments Commission, or ABMC, in 1923, to ensure that those graves are properly maintained. And I can assure you, Mr. Director, they are properly maintained. Now these cemeteries and memorials are a symbol of our nation's commitment to preserving democracy. And I will never forget visiting these incredible monuments to the brave men who made the ultimate sacrifice in service to our great nation. One experience that still resonates with me personally is I visited the graves of 3 of my Tennessee brothers, Robert Tester, Glenn Tester, and James Tester, who lost their lives in service to our nation during World War II. The Tester brothers perished in 3 separate countries during the war, but at the request of their family, they were buried side by side at Henri Chapelle American Cemetery. And these young men came from one of, I think, 9 children in this family, and they grew up in a little community called New Victory, Tennessee, which is in Washington County, where I live. So seeing that they were laid to rest reminded me of the sacrifices that were made to secure the future of our country, and I'm forever grateful for their patriotism. As I look over their headstones, and I have pictures of them on my camera, I remember that these men were more than just soldiers, but they were men who had left the comfort of their homes and tragically never returned. As I couldn't stop thinking about what their mother and other family members must have felt when they learned about the 3 deaths. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for their mother to have made the choice to bury them so far from home. Yet I can't help but think that she made the right choice. The Henri Chapelle Cemetery is beautifully landscaped and cared for and respectfully maintained. It's an appropriate resting place for the Tester brothers and their comrades in arms. And I would certainly, as Ms. Esty said, encourage any Americans traveling abroad to plan a trip to one of these sites and be inspired by the stories of those who are there now. I'd also like to thank the NCA and the ABMC for their efforts to memorialize our veterans accordingly, and I look forward to hearing from all the witnesses today about how we can improve how we honor our nation's heroes. And again, Chairman Boss, thanks so very much for holding this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I ask all that other members waive their opening remarks as per the committee's custom. I want to welcome the witnesses who have joined us this morning and thank you for taking the time to be here today. Our first witness is the Honorable Randy C. Reeves, who is the Undersecretary of Memorial Affairs. He's accompanied by Mr. Ronald E. Walters, the NCA's Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Memorial Affairs. Also joining us today is the Honorable William M. Mass, Jr., who is the Secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission. Testifying on behalf of the American Legion is Mr. Gerardo Avila, who is the Deputy Director of the MEB and PEB and DOD Correction Board. Joining us also for is this our last time?
For this committee, it is. I will be delivering the burn pits testimony this afternoon.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for your service and everything you've done here. But VFW is Mr. Ken Wiseman, the Associate Director of the National Legislative Services. So welcome to all of you. I want to remind the witnesses that your complete written statement will be entered into the hearing record. And before we begin, we need to understand that the Undersecretary Reeves graciously reworked his schedule so he could be here for most of the hearing. But due to a long-standing commitment, he has to leave early to catch a plane, and we'll understand that, but Principal Deputy Undersecretary Walters will remain here at the hearing and be available to answer questions for NCA issues. Undersecretary Reeves, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Boss, Ranking Member Esty, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I am deeply honored to be here to provide an update on the National Cemetery Administration. I appreciate being here with Secretary Matz, who is a strong partner of the VA. The Monuments Commission, the ABMC, continues to do great work, and I thank you for that. I'm honored to be here also with our key Veteran Service Organization partners from the American Legion and from the VFW, who provide critical support to us and to the veteran community. Here with me also from my staff, as you mentioned, is Ron Walters, who is my Principal Deputy Undersecretary. It is, of course, my greatest honor to be able to serve America's veterans and their families as the 6th Undersecretary of Memorial Affairs at the National Cemetery Administration. Over the past few months, I've traveled across the nation, and I continue to be in awe of the commitment and dedication of our NCA professionals. As Undersecretary, I have directed one simple vision for NCA, and that is to ensure that no veteran ever dies. You die the first time when breath leaves you for the very last time, but you only truly die sometime in the future when no one tells your story or speaks your name. And I am committed to ensuring that our veterans don't suffer that second death. From this vision, we have established 3 key priorities that align with VA's core mission and NCA's long-range plan. These are preserving the legacy, which is ensuring no veteran ever dies, providing access and choosing VA for our veterans, and partnering to serve veterans. I'm pleased to note that in conversations that I've had with many members of Congress, I have found that you share these priorities, and again, you are helping us ensure that no veteran ever dies. NCA is dedicated to preserving the legacy of our nation's veterans, and VA's Veterans Legacy Program supports a series of partnerships between VA and academic institutions and engage university students to research veteran stories and reach our youngest generation by teaching K through 12 students about the sacrifice of our previous generations. To complement Legacy, VA is creating an interactive website that will allow veterans' families to upload letters, pictures, photos, and videos to be shared with the public, and one day visitors will be able to use smartphones to scan a veteran's headstone and learn their story. That's the future, and I can tell you the future is here now. I have seen it tested, and it works. Our second priority is to ensure that NCA continues to improve burial access and choice for veterans and their families. To accomplish this, NCA plans to open or expand existing VA national cemeteries while recognizing the need to provide burial options to rural and urban veterans. NCA will establish 7 rural national cemeteries and 5 urban national cemeteries over the next few years. We appreciate the great support of Congress by passing the Black Hills National Cemetery Boundary Expansion Act, signed by the President on May 25th, which will allow NCA to obtain land from the Bureau of Land Management adjacent to our existing cemetery. We're also appreciative of other recent legislation which expanded the casket and urn benefit for unclaimed veterans buried in state and tribal cemeteries, and expanded the eligibility for medallion based on the date of death. The subcommittee's support in getting these bills passed and various others is a reflection of your understanding and support of our enduring mission. Our third priority is to continue our valuable partnership with state and tribal organizations through our Veteran Cemetery Grants Program. It's celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. And since 1978, the Grants Program has awarded over $766 million in grant, which funded 110 state and tribal cemeteries in 47 states, Guam, and Saipan. We look forward to your assistance as we keep moving forward with this valuable program, and these efforts are designed to meet NCA's strategic goal of providing reasonable burial access to 95% of eligible veterans, and we are also working on what I call the hardest 5%, those that are hard to reach in our rural areas and those that have those long distances to travel and such, so that they may also be honored. We're committed to find ways to reach them and look forward to working with you and many other partners, and I welcome members of the committees as well as their staff to visit our national cemeteries at any time and to reach out to me personally for any meeting requests. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for allowing me to be here today, and I look forward to answering any questions that the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. And Secretary Matz, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Rowe, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to discuss the mission, the operations, and the programs of the American Battle Monuments Commission. And the subject of this hearing, I noted, is honoring heroes, memorializing our nation's veterans. And this is so appropriate to our agency mission, and that sentiment inspires the thoughts that I want to share with you this morning. Since the agency's establishment in 1923, our purpose has not changed, and it is to commemorate the service and the achievements of America's armed forces. We execute our mission by creating memorials worldwide where U.S. forces have served, and by maintaining overseas military cemeteries. These are shrines to our fallen and to those that fought by their side. Our first chairman, General John Pershing, he set the tone for the commission when he wrote that, and I quote, "Time will not dim the glory of their deeds." These simple but very powerful words are, in fact, the foundation of everything we do. When the President selected me to serve as Secretary of the Commission, he presented me with an opportunity of a lifetime, one that I don't take for granted. Preserving these national treasures as symbols of selfless devotion and beacons of freedom, this is not a job for me, folks. It is a reverent calling. In fact, it's a duty for this former infantryman. Over this past Memorial Day weekend, we conducted ceremonies at all 26 of our cemeteries in 10 countries spanning 4 continents. And on Sunday morning of that weekend, the 27th of May, just 12 days ago, I stood at a podium in Ain-Marne American Cemetery in France, where was one of the cemeteries that your Codal had an opportunity to visit recently. The Ain-Marne Cemetery and the Belleau-Wood Battlefield that you mentioned, sir, behind it, honor those who fell in the Ain-Marne campaign. Memorialized there, shoulder to shoulder, are more than 2,600 soldiers and nearly 500 Marines who died during that campaign. Then on Sunday afternoon, 3 hours later, we were over at the Wazane American Cemetery, and I understand your visit did not permit you to go to that one, but we want you to sometime return and visit that one. But at the Ain-Marne American Cemetery, where we again offered our thanks and respect to those who died in our nation, in service to our nation. There are 6,012 war dead buried in those beautiful grounds and 241 on the walls of the missing, most of whom lost their lives on nearby battlefields. One of the dead in that cemetery is Sergeant Joyce Kilmer, 165th Infantry, 42nd Division. He rests in Plot B, Row 9, Grave 15. Probably best known for writing the poem Trees. He also wrote these prophetic words taken from the poem Rouge Bouquet. And I quote, there is on earth no worthier grave to hold the bodies of the brave than the place of pain and pride where they nobly fought and nobly died. In July 1918, Kilmer's 42nd Rainbow Division was attempting to break German defensive position just a few kilometers from the cemetery. In 8 days of fighting, that Rainbow Division lost 5,500 men. One of those men was Sergeant Joyce Kilmer. Then on Sunday evening of that same day, I stood at the Chateau Thierry Monument, which you were able to visit, and we appreciate very much. This is not far from the Ain-Marne Cemetery, and we were there to dedicate a new visitor center. It tells the story of men and women like Joyce Kilmer, providing historical context for events that occurred there 100 years ago. And so on that Sunday, May 27th, 3 historic sites in honor and commemoration, underscoring, in my view, the importance of this morning's themes are honoring heroes, memorializing our nation's veterans. So what motivates a man to leave the safety of his trench, to crawl through barbed wire, to attack enemy positions with rifle bayonet, when artillery and machine gun fire halts his unit's advance? How do we ensure that we never forget such courageous service and sacrifice? Since 2007 opening of our Normandy American Cemetery Visitor Center, ABMC has recognized its responsibility to answer those questions by telling the stories of the men and the women honored at these cemeteries and monuments, providing historical context for visitors now far removed from the events of the war years. No one had to tell our first visitors the story. They were the mothers, the fathers, the widows, brothers, sisters of the war dead. They did not seek nor require context. They knew all too well the story. They came to grieve, not to learn, in the 1920s, 1930s. They came to say farewell. Meticulously maintaining cemeteries and memorials is and will remain ABMC's core mission. But that alone is no longer enough to honor those who served. The Commission must also preserve and communicate their stories of competence, courage, and sacrifice. And so it goes to the Congresswoman's initial comments about education. The Visitor Center at Chateau Thierry is the 7th the Commission has opened since 2007. 3 more are in development, all with a common purpose, and that is to enrich the visitors' experience and understanding of the importance of these sacred sites and the significance of the historic events that led to their creation, and to educate our young children. We've also pursued an educational outreach program in the United States, and we're doing this through partnerships with universities and organizations like the National History Day and the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And folks, I invite you to visit our educational program website at abmceducation.org to view the wealth of stories and lesson plans that are developed by teachers for teachers. We've begun to partner with the National Cemetery Administration on World War II content, tying the stories of national cemeteries to those from the overseas cemeteries. Through all of this, we've not forgotten, though, our core mission of building monuments to commemorate service and sacrifice. Last year, we dedicated a monument in Dartmouth, England, commemorating the Allied buildup, training, and actual launching of the D-Day invasion from the shores of England, and a commemorative bronze plaque there in the Britannia Royal Naval College, which served as the 11th Corps Amphibious Force headquarters in World War II, which oversaw the command of the entire invasion force. Later this year, we're going to dedicate a U.S. memorial in the National War Memorial Park in Wellington, New Zealand, and a monument in Iceland commemorating U.S. primarily naval operations there in World War II is also in the early stages of development. So these two commemorations will bring the total number of ABMC memorials and monuments to 31. And of course, next year, as has been already mentioned, we will commemorate the 75th anniversary of D-Day. To prepare for that historic event, we are refreshing the exhibits at the Normandy Visitor Center. 11 years have passed since the original exhibits opened to the public. And over the next couple of years, we're also going to be improving the cemetery's entrance, traffic flow, parking, upgrade, and add to existing comfort facilities, and of course, revamp the security screening areas to better handle peak visitation periods. And I will tell you, we are able to do this as a result of Congress's $30 million one-time appropriation in 2016. And believe me, I think we're good stewards. We're putting all of that to good use. At the Pointe du Hoc Ranger Monument, just west of Normandy, we are developing a site master plan to address the challenges posed by the dual need of providing visitors a positive and safe experience while protecting the integrity of this historic cultural landscape. With the support of the subcommittee and by the authority of the public law, as you know, we assumed ownership of the Lafayette Escadrille Memorial Cemetery just outside Paris in January 2017. This memorial honors American combat aviation pioneers, 49 of whom are interred in a crypt beneath the monument next to 2 French aviators. We will better tell their incredible story next year when we complete a conversion of the caretaker's cottage on the site into a small visitor center, and we're working to improve the appearance of the memorial grounds to an ABMC standard while preserving their naturally rustic character. And finally, I'm happy to report that the restoration of the Clark Veterans Cemetery in the Philippines, where we have interred 8,600 Americans, is progressing well. We're in the final stages of improvements in the plot areas where the headstones have been partially buried and unreadable, really, since the volcanic eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991. And I want to thank the National Cemetery Administration, the Honorable Randy Reeves here, for partnering with us to provide more than 3,000 new headstones to replace those that were damaged beyond repair. So I say to the committee, all of these programs and projects have a singular focus: to honor and to memorialize America's armed forces, our heroes, for their unselfish and their dedicated service and sacrifice. The poet, Archibald MacLeish, served as an ambulance driver, later as an artillery officer in World War I. MacLeish's poem, The Young Dead Soldiers, includes this very eloquent and timeless challenge. They say we were young, we have died. Remember us. They say we leave you our deaths. Give them their meaning. So many have given us their deaths. It is for us and our children, for generations to come, to give them meaning. That is, and it will remain, the mission of the American Battle Monuments Commission. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report, my remarks, and I welcome any comments you might have.
Thank you, Secretary. Mr. Avila, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
NCA's mission is simple: to honor veterans and their families with final resting places in national shrines with lasting tributes that commemorate the service and sacrifice to our nation. This mission can be traced back to President Abraham Lincoln. On July 17, 1862, President Lincoln signed legislation authorizing the President of the United States the power to purchase lands and establish national cemeteries to bury soldiers who died in the service of the country. In 1973, a new law authorized the transfer of 82 national cemeteries from the Department of the Army to the Department of Veteran Affairs, essentially creating and establishing the NCA. Chairman Bost, Ranking Member Esty, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs. On behalf of National Commander Denise H. Rohan and our 2 million members of the American Legion, thank you for the opportunity to testify on this important topic. NCA operates 135 national cemeteries, 33 soldier lots, along with monument sites in 40 states and Puerto Rico. Under its current purview, NCA is responsible for perpetual care of 4.5 million intern veterans of every war and conflict and family members. NCA also provides funding to establish and expand and improve 109 cemeteries in 47 states and territories, including tribal trust lands. NCA provides headstones, markers, medallions to commemorate veteran service. During fiscal year 2017, NCA conducted over 171,000 interments in national and state cemeteries, provided more than 361 headstones and markers, 13,000 bronze medallions, and 670,000 presidential memorial certificates. NCA's yearly customer satisfaction survey consistently receives ranks in the mid-90s. The last result of the latest survey ranked at 99% on cemetery appearance, 96% on quality of service, and 99% of the respondents say they will recommend to other veterans. The American Legion has engaged our membership, and we regularly hear veterans echo the sentiment found in NCA's yearly satisfaction survey. We frequently receive calls complimenting the level of professionalism displayed by NCA employees when rendering final respects for their loved ones. The families often share with the American Legion that NCA is surprisingly well-managed, understanding, and extremely helpful, which is quite contradictory to the expectation they had, considering NCA as a division of the Department of Veteran Affairs, the second largest bureaucracy in the federal government. Ensuring veterans receive the postmortem respect they deserve is a priority of the American Legion. In 1962, the American Legion created and established the Graves Registration and Memorial Affairs Committee, now known as the National Cemetery Committee, an internal committee designed to focus on these important issues impacting all veterans. The American Legion maintains a professional staff dedicated to formulate and recommend to our National Executive Committee, to the Veterans Affairs and Rehabilitation Commission, policies, plans, and programs as they relate to the National Cemetery Administration and the interment of veterans, active duty service members, and their dependents. In response to issues and concerns, the American Legion adopted 2 resolutions at our 2016 National Convention. The resolution number 237, the American Legion supported legislation to amend the Code of Federal Regulation 38-632 and specify that VA recognized accredited representatives be authorized to apply for a headstone, marker, or a medallion in the absence of next of kin. This common sense resolution was created because we have seen a number of cases where a deceased veteran was not able to receive a grave marker or have a placement issue due to damage simply because the relative did not make the request. The American Legion also created and passed Resolution number 9, allowing us to support the transfer of land from the Bureau of Lands Management to NCA to expand the Black Hills National Cemetery in South Dakota. 2 weeks ago, on May 25th, President Trump signed legislation transferring approximately 200 acres to expand the cemetery. The passing of this legislation confirms the commitment and obligation we have to honor the memory of those that have served. The American Legion is not aware of any obstacles to access for any veteran wishing that their final resting place be a cemetery operated by the NCA. That stated, we do receive inquiries and concerns on 2 topics: the issuing of NCA headstone or markers for veterans buried in private cemeteries, and wait times when calling the scheduling office in St. Louis, Missouri. It is our sincere hope that VA, NCA, and this committee take a closer look, identify, and take the necessary corrections to these discrepancies between veterans who are authorized a headstone or marker in a private cemetery and those who are not, and eliminating the wait times at the scheduling office. Ensuring that those who have selflessly raised the right hand in defense of the nation receive the honorable and respectful final resting place they deserve is a priority of the American Legion. And by the action of this committee, we can see that it is for you as well. Chairman Bost, Ranking Member Esty, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share the position of 2 million members of this organization. I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Avila. Mr. Wiseman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Bost, Ranking Member Esty, and members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the veterans of foreign wars of the United States and its auxiliary, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the important issue of how our nation memorializes our veterans. VA's mission to provide veterans a final resting place worthy of their sacrifice to our nation is a top priority for the VFW. While the National Cemetery Administration and the American Battle Monuments Commission generally do a good job, there are always ways to improve the delivery of memorial benefits to veterans. We appreciate this opportunity to highlight several areas. We hear from VFW posts around the world about the amazing work that ABMC is doing. VFW Post 605 in Paris, France, reports that the ABMC efforts to care for cemeteries and monuments have resulted in some of the most emotionally moving experiences a visitor could have. The VFW urges the subcommittee to support efforts by ABMC to establish visitor centers, which will allow visitors to properly honor and remember those who are buried in the cemeteries. The centers will also allow for better use of staff so that they can focus on other management aspects of their job. The ABMC management of Clark Cemetery in the Republic of the Philippines is another success story that the VFW is proud to report. VFW Post 2485 in Angeles City, the Philippines, notes that the repairs and maintenance of the cemetery are superior and burials continue in a way that allows Americans to be buried there with honor. The VFW is very supportive of NCA's Veterans Legacy Project. VLP leverages technology to preserve history and spread awareness of the brave men and women buried in the cemeteries. Updates on each veteran can be provided to ensure the profile is accurate and truly reflects the life of the veteran. Modern technology will allow VLP to be viewed through a mobile application and online, enabling future generations to learn about the sacrifices made by generations that came before them. However, the VFW has learned that the call center for all VA-managed burials has become overwhelmed due to staffing issues. A surviving sister of a veteran reported that she was told it would be at least 6 weeks before a burial could be processed for her brother, the deceased veteran. This is unacceptable. The VFW calls for a review to ensure proper staffing is in place so that burials can be scheduled in a timely manner, and the Undersecretary has reached out to the VFW on this matter, and we appreciate his outreach. The VFW strongly supports passage of H.R. 5588, legislation that would transfer Mare Island Naval Cemetery to NCA for management. The U.S. Navy used this cemetery as the final resting place for more than 800 veterans. Included in this number are 3 Medal of Honor recipients. One of them is James Cooney. He was born in Ireland and immigrated to the United States. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps and deployed with the 1st Marine Regiment to the Boxer Rebellion in China. Private Cooney was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest award for valor that can be bestowed upon an individual in the U.S. military, for his distinguished service in the presence of the enemy. Yet VA has refused to take responsibility of ensuring that Private Cooney and the other honorable veterans buried at Mare Island Naval Cemetery have a final resting place worthy of their service to our nation. These are photos of headstones at Mare Island Naval Cemetery. This is unacceptable, and the VFW wants to see and is willing to work with both the committee and NCA to ensure that proper steps are taken. The Mare Island Naval Cemetery is in disrepair, and the VFW will not rest until it is fixed and properly maintained. The lasting legacy of those who have served our country is on display in cemeteries and is a testament to the cost of freedom. While our nation remembers the service of veterans who are no longer with us on Memorial Day, NCA and ABMC ensure that a daily reminder withstands the test of time. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony, and I want to thank you and the ranking member for the kind words at the beginning of the hearing. Your staff was key to all of the success that we have had so far with the Blue Water Navy bill. I want to particularly thank Carolyn, Chris, and Maria for their help. They have represented you well, and I personally thank them. And one of my key projects next year as a state commander and as an accredited service officer is to find every Blue Water Navy sailor and every surviving spouse in the Commonwealth of Virginia. On January 1st, the VA will be getting a whole lot of claims from Virginia. I thank you, I yield back, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Weisman. Just so you know, I am going to go ahead and start the questioning, so I will yield myself 5 minutes for questions. Secretary Matz, in your testimony, we know that Congress has recently passed legislation allowing the AMBC to take jurisdiction over the Lafayette Israel Memorial Cemetery outside of Paris. This memorial and cemetery, which I had the opportunity to visit last month, includes a final resting place for 49 American aviators who helped train French pilots before we entered World War I. I understand that the site was in rough shape when we took it over, but let me tell you that it looks very good and obviously headed towards looking even better. Can you please describe the work that you're doing there right now?
Yes, sir. We took ownership in January of 2017, and prior to that, we partnered with what heretofore had been a French foundation, and the French government had actually owned the cemetery and the land. And from that partnership, we got $1.7 million from the French government and from those private funds, and did a lot of restoration there, sir, 2015 through 16. We cleaned, repaired the stonework, we did some re-leveling, we did some repointing, repaired plaster, and of course, if you got down into the crypt in the vault, that was leaking, so we put a lot of money into that and upgraded that. Also painting, metalwork, et cetera. What we have planned now, and as you say, you went through there, we have a project, as I mentioned very briefly in my opening comments, to turn the old caretaker's cottage into a small visitor center. And I will tell you, I'll report that's gone along very nicely. Completion is anticipated next Memorial Day, and that should be a very nice dedication. We're also in the process of looking at waterproofing and repaving the memorial surface there, and that's at a cost of $1 million. Improving a disabled access ramp that we need there for folks, and also replacing paths and curbstones. We also have our horticulturist in our Paris office has been spending a lot of time there in the grounds to bring the grounds up to a standard, and the woodland areas up to a standard. So these are the things we're looking at there, and in fact, I would say folks from our Paris office are out there probably on a weekly basis, seeing how we can continue to repair and bring that up to date.
It's wonderful because it has an unbelievable potential, and I know you'll do well with that.
Well, thank you, sir.
The Undersecretary Reed, can you describe for me the legacy, the Preserving the Legacy program in detail on what you see as vision there?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The Veterans Legacy Program itself is set up to be able to have both an educational component that I discussed before, and also what I like to look at as my prime mission. I'm the Undersecretary for Memorial Affairs, so it is to memorialize and remember those who have served our country so well. Through a number of different partnerships, and also partnerships with ABMC that were discussed earlier, we have awarded 9 grants this year. The original program awarded 3. So we have got that many universities and others who are doing the research and learning about those veterans, doing the lesson plans that are used in middle schools, high schools, and others. But the other component is the component that we're developing so that you can walk up, as I said, with your smartphone and be able to put that smartphone in front of a headstone. It will decipher the arrangement of the letters on the headstone and pull up the information about that veteran and their service. And in most cases where we're able to, the service that they provided and the things they did after military service. And when I said that the future is here, I've seen the demonstration at the University of Central Florida, and I was able to walk up to a headstone. It accessed the database, and I was able to see what that veteran had done both before and after. And what I just want to bring this, to a little bit of reality about what it's doing for students out there. I spoke to a graduate student at the University of Central Florida, and I asked, what does this program mean to you? And he looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he said, I was able to bring my veteran back to life. And what he meant by that is, as a World War I veteran, African-American, who served actually in Europe, that had been lost to history, and through his research and his learning, he was able to tell that story. And now that veteran will never die.
Thank you. My time has expired. Ms. Esty, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank all of you gentlemen for your hard work joining us here today and making yourselves available to help ensure that we all fulfill our duty to honor and memorialize those who have served this country. Under Secretary Reeves, I have three areas I'm hoping to cover in the less than 5 minutes I have. One is to Mr. Avila's question about clarifying the criteria for headstones in private cemeteries. That's questions we often get as members of Congress, and I think that would be helpful. Two, on the wait times, which I know you're working on, but that was raised by both Mr. Avila and Mr. Weissman. And again, I know that you've got some plans, and if you can briefly share with us your proposals going forward, I think that would be helpful for us to know, and also hopefully encourage veterans who may be watching or reading about this, about how important it is to bring these concerns forward. That's the only way we can fix things, is if we know about them. And the last is on Mare Island. You and I discussed this yesterday. Thank you, Mr. Wiseman, and I know that Ms. Brownlee was hoping to join us. I think she has a scheduling conflict. As the daughter of a Navy man, grew up in Northern California. I'm familiar with that. I will be seeing the site in the next week or two. Mr. Reeves, we talked about this, Undersecretary Reeves. If you can talk about your proposal at this point to begin to address the sorry state of repair of the headstones, et cetera. And Mr. Bill Rickus is not with us here. He is the co-sponsor of that bill, and I'd like you to address, if you can, all three of those. Thank you.
Absolutely. First of all, I'll go ahead and address the wait times first, if that's okay. The first thing I want to tell you is I called the call center myself this morning before I came here at what would normally be a peak time. I went into the call queue and I was talking to a representative in less than 5 minutes, okay? And I asked some questions about workload and those kinds of things because I want to know what's going on in the field. Secondly, one of the places I went first was the call center. I will be returning personally to the call center later this month. As you know, we've provided copies of our plan that we're working. I want to be fully transparent. We provided it both to our VSO partners and to also your staffs, and we'll provide it to anybody that would like to see what we're doing to rectify what I see as some issues that we've got there. First of all, to that, one of the problems that we had that was showing, peak, more than peak, call times had to do with our phone system, and we're working with our IT folks in VA, getting, very good support from that. We'll be, correcting that. We've corrected some of the issues, and also to the issue that Mr. Wiseman, specifically the specific case, I'm going to be talking to that individual myself because I'm going to tell you, whether it's 6 weeks, whether it's actually 2 weeks or any other time, and my numbers show me that it was about 2 weeks, and they may be wrong, so I'm not assuming anything. So I'm going to be talking to that individual myself. If we have things like that, it doesn't go to my philosophy and our belief that we only have one time to get it right. That one time we don't get it right is one time too many. And I'm going to correct that, I can assure you. And we'll work with the committee and staff to provide any further information that you need. But I'll be very detailed in those responses and the information I gave you. Okay? Secondly, I'll now go to Mare Island because that's a little more complicated. First of all, I want to tell you that I was in California last week for some other events. And because this means so much to me, I went to Mare Island myself. And I'm going to tell you, Mr. Wiseman, thank you for the passion that you and VFW have to bring the attention to this. My heart is broken. I got pictures too, and I don't like them. And I'm very upset by what I saw. But beyond that, now I have to look at what's really needs to be done. As soon as we found out about this, and this was in the news, the National Cemetery Administration reached out to the city of Vallejo, California. They also reached out to the Navy, and we've been working with the Navy to bring forth an IRT grant that would refurbish that cemetery. and I believe that that should be approved fairly quickly. I can't speak for the Navy. I'm not going to speak for their process, but I believe it should be approved fairly quickly. I think there's a good chance of that. And then secondly, we've committed to doing whatever we need to do to replace headstones or anything else is there to bring that to a standard where those veterans and their family members and others that are there will be appropriately honored. I do realize that Mare Island was transferred to the city of Vallejo in 1996, and there has been nothing to keep it in repair since that time as far as I can tell. I'm not here to cast aspersions or throw rocks at anyone. What I'm here to do is to tell you that what we need to focus on right now, I believe, is what steps we can take immediately, and those things that we are doing that I've just described to make sure that those veterans that are there are appropriately honored. I will say one thing, and this is not anything other than the fact that I feel personally that we need to be careful about every time someone does, because there was an MOU between the Navy and Vallejo to keep this cemetery up. I would recommend that we be careful about immediately going to say we should take over something every time someone doesn't meet their obligation, because that could set a precedent that, that maybe we don't want to. But that is a matter for the committee and for Congress to consider, not me. And then if I've answered that, then the headstones, and let's see, I'm going to have to get just a little bit of information on headstones. I think the question was the inscription for the spouse, right? Is that correct? Correct. Okay. We can't provide inscription for a spouse or dependent on a headstone that is currently in a private cemetery, and that's based upon the statute. So we're following the law, and I can't, ask or suggest, but if that's something that Congress might take up, that might be appropriate. And then we do have a legislative proposal that would allow us to do that, and I would like to be able to talk to your staffs and others and our VSO partners to be able to get more information on that for you and more detailed information.
Thank you very much. It went over time, but
I'm sorry.
No, but I appreciate that and the transparency and importance of, again, on Mare Island. I think we need to start with getting it to an appropriate state where it should be, and then we'll continue to stay at the table and do our best to get it right. Again, I want to thank you for your efforts.
And thank you for that, because in any case, we need to focus first on honoring our veterans.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tessie. Mr. Secretary,
I'd like to stay until 12:30, sir. I'm
Okay,
going to
that's
extend
fine.
my
We're
my
glad
time
to have you here. All right.
They'll just have to go fast, sir.
all right. Ms. Radowagon, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bost and Ranking Member Estee, for holding this hearing today. Thank you to the panel for your testimony. Honoring our fallen heroes is an important, if sensitive, issue, and I'm glad we can hold this hearing today to ensure that we get it right. I'd like to focus on services for our veterans and families in remote and rural areas. For example, my home district of American Samoa is thousands of miles from the nearest veteran cemetery, and the families of these veterans do have options for honoring their fallen loved ones in the form of VA-issued grave markers. This is a very good program. However, I believe it's being underutilized and could benefit from some improvements. American Samoa is beautiful but small enough that we don't have street addresses for mail to be delivered, and we instead have to rely on P.O. boxes. The VA-issued grave markers can't be delivered to P.O. boxes and need to be delivered to a physical address. As you can see, this presents a problem for my district. Fortunately, our local VSOs and the good folks at our local VA clinic have established a workaround and will help facilitate the delivery by holding the marker at the clinic for pickup. However, this workaround process is not always immediately apparent to my constituents. While VA reported to my office that no grave markers have ever failed to be delivered once ordered, I believe the initial confusion on the instructions for a grave marker application regarding P.O. boxes means that not all families are taking advantage of this service. So, under Secretary Reeves, what improvements could the VA make to ensure that families in remote and rural areas who may not have access to a nearby burial option have the ability to honor their deceased loved ones, either with the Grave Marker Program or other initiatives?
Thank you very much for that question, and I understand, having been briefed on this, a little bit ago, is that in the case of Samoa, that, I believe, is a misinterpretation both on our part, and I'm going to take that for action, on what a P.O. box actually means. And in Samoa, I know that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a P.O. box is actually, in most cases, a physical address. And we are now delivering them based upon the fact that those are actual physical addresses, and we are in the process of clarifying how we need to do that for our workforce also, so that people won't go through that. Because it says P.O. box, we were interpreting that I think as what we would normally see as a P.O. box, centrally located P.O. box, like here in the mainland, but that is not really the case, I think, there. So I'm seeing the reports that I've gotten is that we have been successfully delivering them to P.O. boxes because they're actually physical addresses. And I think the biggest thing we've got to do is make sure that we clarify that both on the form and that we clarify that for our folks so that there's no misunderstanding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Just so you know, Ms. Estes had to leave, so Mr. Lamb has moved into the chair, so the Marines are now in charge. Mr. Lamb, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
They're going to give us an Army Infantry Division next, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you to Mr. Matz and Mr. Reeves in particular for giving us some poetry this morning. I really enjoyed that, and it reminded me of a story about the building of the World War II Memorial here in Washington, D.C. When that was being built, the man who was the overall manager of the construction site stayed in a trailer on the site where they were building the memorial, and he told a story afterward about getting a knock on the door of the trailer after hours one night, and there was an older gentleman on the other side of the door who had driven across the country by himself for 2 days from Kansas or someplace like that, and when he opened the door, the man just handed over his dog tags from World War II, and he told the construction manager, I just want you to throw those down in the ground underneath one of those big pillars that are going in the World War II memorial. And he didn't want anything else. He didn't want his name on a plaque. He didn't want a ceremony or anything special. He just wanted to know that those are going to be down there forever. And I think that's consistent with some of the things that you gentlemen said, which is that we owe it to veterans just to let them know that that connection that they've made to each other and to our nation through their service is never going to be broken, and that we're never going to let it be broken. And that's what I took from your comments, and just know that you have a partner here in that effort. I also think that with the passage of time, you placed the focus in the right place, which was that we need to tell the people of this generation and of future generations about these men and women who came before us and what they did to allow us to still stand on this ground today. So with that, I'm interested in hearing a little bit more, Mr. Reeves, if you don't mind, about the educational program and the mobile app that you talked about. How widely in use is that right now, or where we're going time-wise with that?
Thank you very much for that question. And where we're at right now is, as I said, we have 9 institutions across the country right now that are doing that. Now, each one of those institutions has multiple, cemeteries that they're actually working with, and it's actually happening right now in our national some of our national cemeteries. And what I'll do is, just for the sake of time, is I'll have my staff provide the full list. Great. And who's doing what and what the program in each area specifically entails, if that would be acceptable.
That would be great, sir. Thank you.
But what I would like to say is, as you, as members of Congress, are back in your districts, if you have universities that have history and research components, encourage them to seek out and apply for these legacy grants so that I can take that to more parts of the country. I will tell you that the timeline will move as everything does with the amount of funding that is available for grants. We have to be realistic about that. But my vision is that there will be at least one, educational affiliate, meaning university or other affiliate in every state by the time I'm done with this.
Excellent. I am from the 18th District of Pennsylvania, which has the National Cemetery of the Alleghenies there. Have you had the chance to visit that one yet, Mr. Reeves?
I have not been to the Alleghenies yet. However, one of my colleagues, one of my senior colleagues at VA actually went and spoke there on Memorial Day, which that's what we do is we ask our senior folks to go out to all of our cemeteries, and she came back raving about the beauty of the cemetery and the outpouring mainly of the community for that program. So I'm impressed with what they're doing there, and I'm impressed that and glad that you mentioned that because that's one of the highlighted places that I had.
I'm thrilled to hear that. I am running out of time, so I just want to say I'd like to personally invite you out there. The next chance that you get, I'd love to have you there, and I'd love to explore ways to expand the educational offerings. And I think there are some infrastructural needs there as well, with it being a newer cemetery that just came online. So I hope I can work with you on that, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Absolutely. And if I may say, I would ask, please encourage the schools in your area to apply.
If it's all right, and with the blessing of the committee, I got a couple more questions I'd still like to ask. Mr. Avila, your testimony highlighted a new NCA initiative, the pre-need eligibility determination. In your experience, has this program successfully reduced delays and red tape for veterans and their families?
So the pre-need eligibility program, I believe it started several years ago. A veteran can basically file an application. It doesn't guarantee them a slot, but it just eliminates the initial eligibility criteria that NCA has to confirm that a veteran is eligible for interment in a national or state cemetery. So by having that done, I think the biggest thing that we see is that the veteran had that conversation with the family, which is a very important conversation to have, because most of the time the calls that we receive are when a veteran, next of kin, the spouse or a family member saying, look, my father or our brother veteran or sister is the veteran that passed away, what do we need to do? A lot of it comes to they never had the conversation, where is the DD-214 that NCA is going to need? So we find this program extremely helpful. We think it does reduce the waiting period. And like I stated on my remarks and my testimony, it's not an emergency as far as the waiting. The background sheet that NCA provided for us clearly states kind of what we've been hearing, where the wait time is 32 to 45 minutes, and this is for the scheduling, not the official port for the verification. So if you're able to do the pre-need eligibility determination and already take out the first step, is going to increase and expedite when this veteran can be interred and buried. So yes, it's been beneficial.
Good. Secretary Matz, what is the status on the restoration of the Clark Veteran Cemetery in the Philippines?
We're making very good headway. As I think I covered sort of very quickly in my opening remarks, what we've done since we took it over, we're working very closely with Honorable Reeves's agency. They are providing the headstones for us, so we're still doing that. We've done a lot of work in putting paths in some security, et cetera. I have not been out there yet myself. That's on my visit list in the next 2 months to get out and visit the Pacific and our superintendent there. But I will tell you, sir, it's coming, and I've seen photos of it. It's coming along fine, and we've certainly got the dollars for it right now to do what we need to do.
Good.
And of course, as you know, its sister right there, Manila, which is our largest cemetery of all 26, we're doing a lot of work there in irrigation systems and also in putting a new visitor center there. And also on the Clark, we're doing irrigation systems there too.
It's good to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you. With that, I want to thank the witnesses again. I would recognize Mr. Lamb as the ranking member if he wants to do any closing remarks. Or
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman, but thank you for recognizing me.
thank you. Well, I want to thank the witnesses again for being here today. And as I said earlier, your statements for today's witnesses will be entered into the hearing record. And I want to close out by saying this. Thank you so much, both of you, for what you do. And when you say that we need to make sure that our veterans, that their history is not forgotten.
Yeah.
When we were we were actually at American Flanders Field, and watching, hearing their Memorial Day services, that they take students from right there that come in and take the names of those veterans and study their history. And on Memorial Day, students, not from this nation, from that nation, because of the liberation that they received by our Americans, they actually study those histories and give testimony about that individual that they had studied that year for that Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. What an amazing thing, and I think our children should do the same and understand what it is that put forth, not only abroad, but here in the United States with the cemeteries that are there. But I do want to say this too, because this is something that stuck, that I've held on to. When you leave the museum or visitors center at Arlington, one of your predecessors has a quote, Mr. Matt's on the wall. It's General Mark Clark. And he was the chairman of the American Battle Monuments Commission from 1969 to 1984. And here's what he says. Right. If ever proof were needed that we fought for a cause and not for a conquest, it could be found in these cemeteries. Here is our only conquest. All we asked was enough soil in which to bury our gallant dead. That's hallowed soil. Yep. Mm-hmm. That is hallowed soil. And we need to make sure that that ground, which we do hold with our most gallant men and women, is never, ever forsaken. And I thank both of you for doing that. And with that...
Absolutely, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
With that, I also want to, with unanimous consent, that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks, including extraneous material. Hearing no objections, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned.